What's up, dude?
My friend, my companion, you were here.
Yeah,
Dr. Chris Hardy.
Bill. I had you were soloing it there for a little bit, for a couple
You know,
episodes.
it didn't feel good. I felt
Yeah.
like I was missing something in my heart.
Well, yeah, I understand. I have that effect.
Yes, you do. How you been?
Oh, dude. Well, it's funny. I've been weird. I've been sick again. Interesting, huh? I know you're surprised.
What do you think that is? Is it
Well,
just because you're like old as dirt now,
yeah,
or
yeah,
what
no,
is going
that's
on?
actually going to be a subject I want to talk about today.
Okay.
So let's not give it all away. Yeah, I'll tell you some general things about the immune system and exercise and the whole stress cup thing, and then I want to kind of use myself as a case study because it's yeah.
Yeah, that's I mean, when because I've had it before where I've gotten sick, or at least low level sick,
Hmm?
where it felt like for 3 months, like I was just battling,
Yeah,
never completely over it, and then just right back into it, battling. And
yeah.
I, I don't know. It's like I know our sport is really intimate, but
Well, not
I don't know.
yeah. It's not. You know, there's a bunch of factors in it. I want to definitely delve into it. We've kind of talked around this subject before, and we talked about, you know, in when we talked about overtraining and allostatic load and the stress cup, but we never talked specifically about the immune system and does all exercise negatively affect it? You know, that type of question, right? And so I think it's
Yeah.
actually fairly interesting. And there's some things that you can do to help mitigate some of that a bit. So we'll talk more about that. Did you have anything, any questions in the queue?
Well, I actually did have one that came up. So there's someone that has started jiu-jitsu only a couple weeks ago, and they're in their mid 30s,
Hmm.
and this actually kind of, I think, will kick off the subject that you're trying to talk about here fairly well. They are a ex-professional athlete,
Hmm.
as literally the highest level you could imagine in professional gymnastics. So
Oh, wow. Okay.
they uh they started that, and then, or they just started jiu-jitsu, and they are trying to figure out what frequency to train at. And they're looking at, because they still teach gymnastics, and really the question comes from, are they going to overload themselves?
Yeah,
Now,
that's a good question.
they are used to training in a training session like 4 hours,
Right.
right? Like that's one training session.
Yeah.
And they're just starting jujitsu, different kind of stress level, a little bit, and they're looking at introducing cold plunging, sauna work,
Mm,
which I said all are, because they heard that these are good things for grapplers to do. And I said, yes, there is some recovery benefits, absolutely, but it is a stressor. So if you're going to be throwing your body through a new stressful activity, even if the person is in very good shape, but different kind of load, different kind
hmm.
of stressor, and then also they're not used to cold plunging. They're not used to maybe doing a ton of sauna work. And now I talked to them. They said they have done like the banya style, where
Yeah.
cold plunge back into the sauna, right out of the sauna back into the cold plunge
Hmm.
for like a 10-minute session, let's say,
Hmm.
of back and forth. So they're not completely foreign to it, but I on my inside I was a little worried that their body, especially in their mid 30s, they were a full-time professional athlete 8 years ago. So how is that going to, or are they, how would you address that person that is just getting into it? They're in great shape, but they are in their mid 30s, early 30s, let's say, and they're just coming into jiu-jitsu and they want to go full on. They're ready to get going. They
And
have that kind of mindset.
well, yeah, it's coming from a professional athlete, especially. Are they still doing any kind of training themselves or just coaching gymnastics?
they lift. They had a spell for a couple years of powerlifting. They looked they looked up, because I deep dove with them. They looked up the USA national records for their weight class in like bench, the big lifts,
Yeah.
and they decided they wanted to beat them.
Okay.
So
I
I
like.
think they're 180 pounds, and or they bench over 400.
Wow.
And I I saw on their Instagram a video of them. I think it was like, is sumo deadlift where your legs are really spread,
Yep.
like,
Yep.
so I think he was sumo deadlifting 500 for 10 reps.
Yeah.
And so he's um still weightlifting, not to that extent, not chasing those numbers, but still weightlifting.
Okay.
I guess in their first 2 weeks they noticed their cardio is complete garbage.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they started to taper back on lifting and doing more cardio style workouts.
So my point being, though, they're not actively training gymnastics, especially. There is a difference between men and women's gymnastics. As far as at the professional level, men's gymnastics I mean, both are incredible.
Hmm.
But men's with the rings and stuff, that
Yeah.
especially that huge amounts of isometric strength loading. And if you're doing 4-hour training sessions, that's, I mean, it's not sustainable. That's why they have, that's why those professions, they kind of don't last
They
until
have
they're
an
30.
expiration date.
Yeah, big time. So, okay, you already had some good thoughts on this, as far as you're a little worried about, hey, okay, just because you've heard these things are good, there are stressors like cold plunge and sauna, right? First of all, I would wait on any of those type of things that are, hormetic stressors until they maybe adapt a little bit. Maybe give them about 6 months into training jiu-jitsu
Mm.
to have their body adapt. Because right now they're trying to do a completely different energy system,
Hmm.
right? We're putting new stimuli in. It's very much like the Lance Armstrong effect, where, well, even more so, where we have a elite uh, cyclist
Yeah,
that, has incredible cardio, but then did a marathon and it does not have that same level of, with running, because
sure.
there is some sport specific stuff. So it's even more so going from gymnastics to jiu-jitsu, although there's a huge carryover with the isometric strength. So anyway, I would first wait and really concentrate on letting my body adapt for about 6 months before I did a whole bunch of outside stuff. Okay,
Mm.
especially with their mindset too. You don't get to be a professional gymnast or any of those high level athletes without that mindset of go, 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 get my training in, really disciplined, that type of thing.
Yeah,
You might have to put the brakes on that a little bit, and kind of ease.
especially because we're not only is the sport um, taxing on the body,
Yep.
but we're practicing breaking limbs and
Mm-hmm.
going to end range with a lot of our limbs, so we can have potential injury risk. I mean, it's fairly common for us to have soft tissue like minor tearing
Yeah.
constantly just
Well,
with
well,
practice.
it's so true, but I would argue though that preparation, gymnastics, because they are routinely going to end ranges, generating strength, especially some of these routines they do. I
Yeah.
mean, and so I think it's a good setup and prep for a jujitsu person.
Oh, I have to imagine it's
The core
uh
strength, I mean, just the absolute
yeah,
isometric strength is probably incredible. Probably a real handful on the mat too, even at
yeah.
the low level. Um, but yeah,
Even more so at the low level because they're going to be
eh,
so much more athletic and strong
well,
than
I'm just saying,
the.
even for an experienced practitioner,
Oh yeah,
you're
yeah.
still gonna be like, wow, okay, this isn't your average white belt type of thing, as far as
Hmm.
their ability to generate force from odd angles, and
Sure.
So anyway, but I would really. It's so hard to tell someone that it's been a successful professional athlete to pull the brakes a little bit, because that is,
Hmm.
completely antithetical to their mindset.
Yeah.
So yeah, and so, but it would serve a good, give them 6 months to, let's say, let me kind of ease into this brand new sport I'm doing, before I start talking, because and that's why I asked if they're competing or if they're doing significant training in gymnastics. Coaching's one thing, but if they're still like, hey, I'm doing a master's competition or something like that,
Sure.
that's a whole nother animal there.
Which I don't believe, from what it sounds like, there's not even that. It's like wrestling, where once your collegiate career, if you're not doing the world team or
Yeah.
Olympics,
Okay.
it's kind of like there isn't anything for adults.
Yeah.
But they still stay in really good shape and do have some stressors on there. And it seems like the mentality's good, where they're more focused. Not They didn't even bring up sparring really.
Mm-hmm.
They just brought up skill acquisition.
Oh, all
Like,
right.
they're one of those, I think they're one of those people where they do a lot of technical training
Mm-hmm.
rather than like, let me just get in there and grind,
Oh, yeah.
and like try to spar for 4 hours a day. It's more like,
Okay.
no, I'm down to drill 10,000 times in one day. That
That
sort of
that actually
mentality.
will serve them well at the beginning too, where,
I think so too.
yeah, so that's a definitely a benefit. But, you know, on the, heavy, I'm not saying you can't do any of the powerlifting lifts, but I would watch the intensity on those, because those can be really taxing. If they're still chasing 1 rep maxes in powerlifting, I would ask, and they're starting jujitsu, then, I'd ask the question, why? Why are you
Mm,
chasing that? And, that training load can be, not helpful to their, their recovery
right,
and all that when they're just starting and trying to get these adaptations.
right,
I mean,
right.
that's,
That makes
and
sense.
the cold and the cold and all that, especially alternating and stuff like that, that's a big hit on the nervous system.
Mhm.
Um,
What
and
kind of frequency would you say would
dude,
be
well,
good once you start implementing it?
yeah, I would, once you start, like, giving them a good 6 months before we start doing these
Sure.
things. It's dependent, like, on else, the whole allostatic load. What else do they do? Um, but because you can't look at any of these things in isolation. So,
Mm,
you know what I mean? Like, I got to look at everything going on, if let's just assume they've adapted fairly well in their first 6 months, they're less sore, they're less, just crushed after training. Um, and they're sleeping well, eating well, relatively low stress, then sure, let's add in, we can add in a session, maybe 1 or 2 a week.
mm, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I believe they're just starting to spar. So for the
Uh,
first couple weeks, they were just doing like fundamental classes where they don't really spar.
yeah.
But it sounds like they're getting bit by the jiu-jitsu bug.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a feeling that 5 days a week is right around the corner of training,
Yeah.
and sparring will be within that. So,
That's where a
um,
coach comes in.
yeah, 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 for sure.
Yeah.
And I think they have a desire to do like a lot of private lessons, because that's kind of, I
Mm,
think, in the gymnastics world
mm-hmm.
is fairly common
Yeah.
to do that kind of individual training,
Yeah.
um, for specific athletes. So I think that's probably going to be really good for them too, because I think they're probably at risk of overtraining
For sure.
within our sport,
Yep.
just being a high functioning, highly motivated, mentally like an individual, that they're going to put their bodies through the ringer, and it's just going to be a different, like, you use that Lance Armstrong thing, is like
Yeah.
the best cyclist in the world does a marathon
So,
and he's average.
yeah.
But that doesn't mean if he just focused on running,
It,
he he wouldn't get there.
correct.
But in the beginning, he
Right.
was more he talks about he was more tired than he's ever been.
Yep.
His body was aching in ways he never thought.
Yep.
So getting through that little bit of wall conditioning the body, I think, will be huge.
Yeah, it's really, but it's what I was alluding to earlier, what you just said, that mentality. I had that same mentality. I'm not saying I was a pro athlete, but for different reasons, because I use my exercise to keep myself from being crazy.
Yeah.
And I'm always tending, and I've always, I trained. I mean, Carrie and I used to go on mountain biking sessions when I was in my 30s. We'd hit both days of the weekend. We'd do 3 to 4 hour crazy mountain biking rides, like back to
Mm,
back, and then we do weightlifting and all that stuff. Because I mean, and that, to me, I was hitting that dopamine hard. I was feeling, that's how I balance my psyche, and so I'm also in that mode, and so is this person. As far as you're gonna, if you're goal oriented, you're gonna get after that. That's where you like, if you're a coach, Bill, to this person, you'd be like, hey, yeah, I love it. I love what you're doing, but we really got to watch the volume and the intensity of your training. And so
hmm
really, and a professional athlete knows how to periodize too.
And they're in tune with their body and all that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So that's a lot, but they just need a little bit. Hey, this is super addicting. This is not from a mental, and this it's just a great sport and martial art that we do, and you can go down that rabbit hole, as you know, and get super obsessed with it. And you just got to watch you don't be your own worst enemy with overtraining, because it is a very real possibility. Especially this person's getting in mid 30s now, still relatively young, but you still see that recovery diminish a little bit, the ability to
Yeah.
recover.
Well, I think, and just kind of going into what your subject is, you know, they could find themselves getting sick more often,
Yep.
something like that, just from the taxing nature of our sport, let
Yeah.
alone even other sports as well. And um, because that seems like kind of what you've ran into a little bit, no?
Dude, I'm completely into that, man. I'm getting better recently, and I always talk about that. It's this constant struggle because, man, I'll go into class, and we'll talk about this here in the thing, but I'll go into class and have the intention of, yeah, I'm really gonna try to take it easy, unless I'm just to try to periodize it a little bit. Man, it's
Hmm
so hard, man. Especially, we get in, the clock starts and there's an hour of rolling time, and people are like, "Hey, man, you want to roll?" And you're like, "Yes." So
Oh yeah.
because it's so fun and it's a struggle there. So I get myself into trouble. If I was myself at 35, 20 years ago, I don't think I'd have near the problem with getting sick. I've noticed it a lot more. So unfortunately, I started jiu-jitsu at 45, coinciding with me, aging.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where, like, I've got myself into trouble, where I'm kind of like in a chronic low level overtrained state. In the winter, and then
Yeah.
come winter time, where you're more susceptible. There you go. But anyway, yeah, man. But what you didn't give this person's name, but just, if you have a good coach like Bill, listen to them, okay? Because you're well versed. I think by doing this, I mean, you already gave some great advice, man. I don't know if you even need me anymore.
You're my oracle. I
Yeah,
need to
okay.
bounce everything off
All
you.
right, fair enough. But but you already have some good thoughts onto it, so I think that's great. Um, hopefully, is that enough to talk about on that?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think some people will also, new people that are just getting started and they want to jump all in and stuff. I'm not a huge fan of people like when coaches, okay, how do I say this? Sometimes people get bit by the bug and they can train a lot in the beginning and not fizzle out. I'm one of them, right? And I, a lot of the time, what happens is coaches say, "Hey, be careful. Don't train so much. Taper it back. Only do 3 days a week, something like that." I think statistically, that is probably a better idea to
Oh,
like tell the new guy that is just completely on fire, training 5 days a week right out the gate, 6 days a week, maybe doing some two-a-days to warn them that
yeah,
their burnout is real and all that kind of stuff.
yep,
But I think instead of just uh, trying to stop them, just making them aware, but
yeah,
not. I think we need to encourage those moments of being on fire, because like someone like Olivia, she goes through spurts of it
Yeah.
where she's feeling kind of dull on the sport or working out in jiu-jitsu or something like that, and then she'll go through a month or two or something, or like a period, and she's done this for years, where I'll be like, we'll both be in bed for going to bed, and she's watching AOJ online.
Right.
You know,
No,
she's
totally.
completely on fire, and she wants to train a lot. She wants to do a lot of comp rounds and stuff like that, and then it tapers back. You know, get your cat's asshole out of my face.
Yeah.
How about that?
Well, she can't help it. She's happy. She has a tail.
So
Yeah.
I think instead of instead of discouraging someone that wants to train a bunch, especially in the beginning, just equipping them with knowledge of like, hey, when you start to feel that little bit of burn, maybe a little bit of getting tired of it, just don't stop. Just
Right.
taper a little bit.
Right. No, it's really good advice. Sometimes it's hard to follow when you're, super enthusiastic and you're feeling really good.
No doubt, no doubt. So yeah, I think that's totally good for that subject. What you had your other piece though?
Yeah. So this is kind of late in the season. We're in, later February now. I probably should have done this one earlier in the
Uh,
the flu and respiratory illness season.
yeah,
So we've talked about, one of the signs of overtraining or overreaching, overtraining is getting, sick more frequently, especially respiratory infections. And, you know, the bottom line is that the older you get, first of all, our immune system it starts to fail a little bit as we age anyway. It's just part of how everything happens with the body. Starts to get less and less effective. And then we have less capacity to deal with physical stressors before we need a lot of recovery. And that's kind of where I found myself, even training 3 days a week in the wintertime, I even with the intention of like really periodizing, sometimes I do it well and kind of back off. Like I go to class and just maybe will help Andrew maybe do some instruction, do some light rolling, but more often than not, those are your friends. You see them, you're like, hey, we get the rolls
yeah.
going, and all of a sudden you know, we had a really intensive thing. Now, here's the thing about the immune system and exercise. So if you look at the scientific literature on it, exercise in itself will not lower the immune system. It is really dependent on intensity and duration. We classically see the overtraining syndrome in endurance athletes because of the nature of their sport. They're training for these long, um, activities. And so their
Mhm.
training is the same way. And so it's really prevalent among endurance athletes. But we have an interesting martial art in that we have aspects of, an endurance thing, but we also have really intense periods too. So when you look at what the medical literature says on the immune system in exercise, moderate intensity exercise, and we'll get back to what that means here in a second. There's a bunch of ways to say what's moderate and what's heavy, right? There's rate of perceived exertion, there's all kinds of things. I have my own thoughts on that, on physiologically. But anyway, this quote unquote moderate exercise tends to enhance the immune system, actually improves it.
Mm.
Right? It's just when very high intensity, especially prolonged exercise, we start getting into over an hour and a half, things like that, will have suppressive effects on the immune system, largely due to the release of the catecholamines, which are like norepi and epinephrine, and cortisol. Go ahead.
So an endurance athlete maybe is doing a long session,
Mm-hmm.
hour and a half, but maybe the intensity isn't, like a sprinter, obviously, but it's a long, taxing session
Yep.
at a strong pace for whoever they are.
Right.
That is where we're starting to get into uh, the maybe some negative effects
That, yeah,
to the immune system,
that, and maybe you're like a CrossFit athlete that does,
which is
um,
the other side.
well,
Maybe it's a 30-minute workout, but it's super intense,
super intense and you do it frequently. What does that sound
which
like?
is
Jiu-jitsu.
literally us.
It can be. It certainly
Yeah.
can be. And so when you, the way I look at physiologically, like I said, American College of Sports Medicine and various other organizations have definitions of what is light, moderate, heavy intensity. I like to think of it, and I think others have too, on how much are, oh geez, we almost lost everything with a cat fight behind the thing. Luckily I have Carrie in here.
Oh my gosh.
It's madness in here today. Okay. So sorry. But I like to look at exercise intensity as, what are you doing to your energy stores physiologically? In other words, are you getting into that glycolytic, meaning glucose using, muscle glycogen using kind of anaerobic stuff? And how
Mm.
much are you into that mode? Are you just kind of peeking into it every little bit, or are you doing some sustained stuff where after you're finished, you're rolling, you're a little shaky in the hands and feel depleted? When that muscle glycogen, that is a good litmus test on to me on intensity, is how long you're in that anaerobic stage. In other words, you're at a high enough intensity where your circulatory system can't deliver enough oxygen to the tissues fast enough to utilize typically our aerobic systems. And that's what aerobic means, utilization of oxygen in the mitochondria. And so, and if we're going anaerobic, then we're having to use the glucose pathways, either from the bloodstream or more commonly from the glucose stored in muscle called glycogen. The more you're using that stuff in an exercise session, I consider that more high intensity, because you have to replete that stuff afterwards. And if you don't, that's where these low carb dudes get into trouble when they start doing glycolytic, kind of anaerobic training. They start to like, oh man, I'm just crashing, right? They're,
Especially like post training, and
well, I want to
they're
get,
just
I want to get into yes, exactly right.
okay.
So one of the things, like I said, if you were, a normal human that is not psychotic like most of us in our field in jiu-jitsu, and you're doing like, hey, I'm doing some cardio sessions, a couple strength and conditioning sessions, I'm getting some moderate intensity acute exercise in, that can be immune enhancing and improve your immune system. But if we're always flirting on overtraining, and where that, the volume and intensity that you can tolerate depends on what your stress cup looks like. How,
Hmm.
which includes how old you are, what else you got going on, are you sleeping well, what's your nutrition look like, that whole 9 yards. That's what I'm talking about. When we're always on that little edge here, we start to actually get suppression of the immune system, including both parts, the main parts of the immune system, what we call the innate, kind of the immediate, like if you have like guards around a facility and they're looking for anyone suspicious, right? That's kind of and they just kind of go after anything that didn't look normal, or, doesn't look like yourself. And it's a non-specific attack. Whereas the innate immune system is like, we have a Delta Force team there to deal with a very specific group we're looking out for.
Hmm.
Right. So they're very tuned to, like, let's say we've been exposed to a certain virus before. That innate not innate, the adaptive immune system are the ones that are very specific to, that's why you won't get that strain of flu again right afterwards, because now we've developed an immune response, so they're looking out for that type of thing in the future, where the innate immune system is the one that's just kind of like, hey, this is foreign, get it. Both
Hmm.
of those systems are depressed with kind of this chronic overtraining type of state here. And we've talked about how to determine whether you're overtrained. We've had plenty of episodes on that kind of stuff. But one of the criteria for that is you're getting more respiratory infections. You're getting sicker. And this is kind of how it works. So again, it's, kind of long-term sympathetic, or that flight or fight system activation. which is the stress response, basically. Norepinephrine, epi, and cortisol, long-term over repeated bouts, will have a suppressive effect. And that's kind of what leaves you, it will recover, but sometimes it can take a while. And I think I've gotten myself into the state where I'm always, and it seems stupid. You're like, dude, you only train 3 days a week. And it's like, well, okay, I'm also around a lot of pathogens. I work in a medical building all day.
Right.
My wife is a physician, also works in so, if we're going to get exposed to something too, so it's, exposure plus opportunity.
Your likelihood, it's like someone that works at Costco or something. You're just
Yeah.
exposed to a lot
A-
of different people's breath.
Absolutely. Well, right. Yeah. And then if you're into this kind of chronic, I'm right on the edge of overtrained all the time, my immune system's suppressed. And, it even starts like in the mouth and nose there's something called secretory IgA, which is an immunoglobulin, which basically when you first get exposed to like a virus or something and you breathe it in, that binds to that. The IgA is an immunoglobulin that binds to that invader, so to speak, and then the immune cells come in and gobble it up, right? But that is depleted as well too. So your first line defenses are kind of depleted, and your secondary, your adaptive immune system, which is kind of your memory system, is also kind of depleted. It's not as effective as well. So, and that can lead you to where I just got sinusitis and a bronchitis from a respiratory infection that probably should have kicked in 3 or 4 days, right? And so now I'm still.
So
Go ahead.
what would you, I don't want to get the cart in front of the horse.
No.
On your topic here.
Yeah.
In this case, your big fat face is the horse. And what are some best practices for people that are in our situation where, young people in their 20s, you're bulletproof, or at least it feels like it.
Yeah.
um, Susceptibility at the older ages, let's call it 30 and up, 35 and up,
Yeah.
that are doing this sport. What are some best practices, whether that's supplemental, just actions in general, to help maybe not defeat this kind of chronic, almost like sickness that's happening, but get ahead of it?
Yeah. No, so there's no magic bullet for it. One of the best studied things in there because what we're basically trying to do is combat the stress response, right? Believe it or not, one of the best studied things that actually does seem to help is carbohydrate repletion. We've talked about this a bunch, specifically carbohydrate. If you're doing this glycolytic, you're just using up glucose from your muscle glycogen, that needs to be repleted. And they found that actually kind of replacing that blunts the cortisol response and helps keep your body out of that threat response.
Specifically for that style of workout. That's I want to emphasize that.
Yes, that's very important because it's glycolytic, meaning we're using that glucose that's stored. And remember, unlike the liver, sugar that goes in the muscle cannot come out of it to use elsewhere. It stays there, where the liver can kind of like take some in, put some out, just like a banker does. Like, hey, I'm gonna take some, then I'm gonna give some away. We store muscle glycogen, and we talked about this before, to allow as a survival mechanism if we needed to do something glycolytic, like for survival, like run away from a wild animal or something. So because that is something that's kind of ingrained in us as a species, when you deplete that, your body really wants to get that back in there. And if it doesn't, we secrete cortisol. And one of the things cortisol does is liberate glucose for use, for the brain and elsewhere. But that long-term, again, short-term, if I did let's say I usually work out moderate intensity, but then I had a real hard training session. Well, that one training session with increased cortisol is not going to really do anything to the immune system long-term. It's just this week after week of this where, it's going to cause a problem. And so something as simple as going what we've talked about this for weight loss too, is if you're going to do your starchy carbohydrate, rice, potatoes, whatever sugar, you want to do it when your glycogen tanks are empty in your muscle so it can just kind of suck it back in there. So not only does that help you metabolically to keep glucose out of your bloodstream and preventing the liver from making a whole bunch of triglycerides out of that, but also it will blunt the stress response. And the body's like, okay, you just repleted that. We're good type of thing. And believe it or
It's
not,
a quality fuel because
yeah.
you should be eating a good quality starchy carb.
Well, yeah, but you're supporting, well, that's up to debate. Of course, I would agree a whole food carbohydrate that actually has other nutrients in it is great. But, you hear people about, if you're going to drink a soda, that's the time to do it, right?
Yeah.
But the whole point of that is your body over time knows like, oh crap, I'm doing something that is depleting this. And if you're not giving it what it needs, it's going to try to do it on its own through a stress response, which then in turn over time lowers the immune system. But if one of the easiest things to do is replete your carbohydrate after a hard training session.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And the other things that are looked at, okay, you're like, oh, what about antioxidants? What about all these other things? Like you mentioned cold plunge. What about non-steroidal anti-inflammatories like ibuprofen, right?
Mm-hmm.
So starting with that one, I definitely don't recommend using ibuprofen afterwards. First of all, we've talked about how that blunts the adaptive response. So you're putting an input into your body and wanting it to respond and rebuild, and we need an inflammatory response to do that in the short term. And ibuprofen will inhibit that. It also inhibits things like, believe it or not, if you strained a muscle, pulled a tendon, it can actually inhibit the healing of that too, because we need an inflammatory response for that. So I'm not a fan of that stuff for many reasons. Plus, it causes a bunch of problems in the gut. Anyway, long-term use of that leads to increased risk of heart attack and stroke as you get older. So that's one I definitely don't recommend. People that load up on antioxidants, again, with inflammation comes oxidative stress, right? Those are two sides of the same coin. And part of our adaptive response, again, requires that inflammation and oxidative stress. And if you're doing these high-dose antioxidants right after your training session, again, you could blunt your adaptive response to that. Yeah. And so those are as far as interventions go. And if you're already in this kind of overtrained state, I would watch the intensity of your recovery. And that includes the temperature and duration of a cold plunge and or sauna. Because remember, those are hormetic stressors, and you can modulate the intensity of those as well too. Or another active recovery, which I think is good, like maybe going on a walk, but don't turn it into another workout. Some of those things are helpful.
Pull-up bar at the playground, and you're like, let me bust out a couple of these bad boys.
Yeah.
And out of nowhere, you're doing like a body weight workout.
Well, those of us that are psychos, I've been guilty of that crap. Yeah. But really, you asked a direct question about intervention, right? The best medicine is prevention, as it always is. Easier said than done, or harder said than done. Easy. No, easier said than done. God damn, I'm having a freaking.
It's okay.
Oh, yeah.
You played a doctor on TV,
dude,
and I get it.
Yeah.
You have a couple faux pas here and there.
I'm barely hanging on, dude. But
what about continued support then? For like immune system and stuff like that. I know.
Yeah, like reishi and like reishi mushrooms or
vitamin D.
Yeah,
quercetin, like some of these things that I know. Olivia and I have a steady protocol that Carrie has had us on, and yourself, and
agreed.
Yeah.
It can absolutely help, but it's not a magic bullet that will overcome your overtraining. So, really figuring out who you are and what your stresses are that fill up. Go back to one of our very early episodes on the stress cup. We did a visual demonstration with actually a cup and different colors of fluid. We talked about That's a really important concept, but figure out who you are and where you're at on that continuum is super, super important in some ways to tell if you're starting to overtrain. You're not going to supplement yourself out of that. However, adequate vitamin D is really important for immune regulation as well too, not just bones and muscles. Quercetin's very interesting. There actually has been some research on that for recovery too. Not a whole lot of long-term stuff, but it seems to be pretty darn beneficial. I think anything you're doing to enhance mitochondrial function, especially in aging, we've talked about methylene blue before. That's huge as far as
Yeah.
your training goes. And like coenzyme Q10 is a good is another supplement for that that works directly at the mitochondrial level. Like I said, methylene blue, all
Hmm.
those things too. I'm not giving medical advice here, but we've talked about it before many times. But yeah, having a good foundation, making sure and making sure you have a high quality multivitamin. I know people are like, oh, I get all I need out of food. Yeah, you probably don't. It
Yeah.
used to be. I think now with farming practices, depletion of soils, and all this stuff, what you think you're getting from your food sometimes can be suboptimal. And so
Yeah.
I always get I'm not trying to throw shade on Costco, but some of those like Target Costco multivitamin those are crap. Get a really well formulated brand like Integrative Therapeutics, Thorne,
Hmm.
Designs for Health that actually have the right form of these vitamins in there that are bioavailable for use. I think is super important for a foundation. And
Yeah,
like, go ahead.
we're like it's a pain in the ass,
Yeah.
but we do take probably like 7 or 8 pills
Yep.
every night when it's vitamin D, quercetin, vitamin C.
Yep.
I think we take a zinc pill there. If we start feeling like we're coming down with something,
Yeah.
then we start switching to the zinc
Well,
lozenges.
zinc and quercetin together are a really powerful combo with that because of, the quercetin acts like an ionophore to kind of let
Mm,
zinc pass into the cellular, where zinc has a hard time gaining access to the internal parts of the cell without quercetin. So, yeah, I
yeah.
love it.
Um, uh, ashwagandha for excuse me, the cortisol response for at night and stuff like
Or if you
that.
don't tolerate ashwagandha, like I apparently don't anymore because of headaches for some reason, it's stupid.
What are you switching to?
Phosphatidylserine. Yeah.
And we basically, after probably 2 or 3 months, we switched to phosphatidylserine
Yeah.
just to kind of keep the body, you know, guessing, I guess, a little bit, just so we're
Yeah.
not taking the same thing constantly over and over. Um,
Yeah.
and then I think that's our pill regimen. And then, but we're taking, there's 2 ashwagandha in there. There's 2 vitamin Ds to get us to 10,000 IUs.
Mm-hmm.
Um, 2 quercetin. I'm not sure the measurement on that. But then in the mornings, we're doing um, lion's mane, cordyceps, shilajit.
Oh, nice.
Olivia's got a new one, a new mushroom compound.
Yeah.
So there's these little things that, and I think, like you said, we're not supplementing our way out of sickness or
Right.
something of that sort, but we are in a extremely, oh, high risk is the right term, but an extremely exposed environment in sport.
Yeah.
So as we get older, if we can do things that just help, then not drinking. Sorry, guys. Sorry, people that like to drink,
It's
but
true.
not drinking, not eating an insane amount of inflammatory food. People know every podcast I used to do a Bang energy drink and a Reese's Nutrageous or something like these processed sugars and all that kind of stuff.
Dude,
As soon as
it's like watching a drug addict, dude. I'd watch you just like being like, dude, I see you start to Jones and you're like, yeah, man.
yeah,
Yeah.
and the thing is, my rate of feeling like I'm coming down with something
Mm-hmm.
has gone down as I've gotten older by kicking drinking, by not. Like I've had gut issues because I was throwing bombs in my stomach with all that gas station crap and kicking all that kind of stuff. So not that I never have ice cream or something
Yeah.
like that, but the frequency is obviously much less, and that has helped tremendously.
Oh, yeah. No doubt.
Lifestyle.
Yeah, and we always hear, the Carrie always refers to on her post the pillars of health, right? And it, all those things are super important. If you come in and you're like, hey, I've had people come in and ask me for, advice on nutrition, and I find out they're sleeping like shit. And I'm like, well,
Hmm.
you probably should, really get those foundational things, because all these other things that are optimizing are just that. We're optimizing things. But if you don't have those foundations in place, you're peeing in the wind, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean that's another actually supplement, I guess, is the CBD and CBD gummies that I take at night, which I mean it was a game changer for my sleep. I've always been
Mhm.
a chronically bad sleeper, and
Yeah,
I am one of those people that only I feel pretty energized after like a 5, 6 hour night of sleep. I'm
sure.
not necessarily a 8 hour kind of person,
Yeah.
um, but if I'm getting like four, I start to feel it.
Yep.
Three, I start to feel it. So the gummies and all this other regimen has like completely changed my sleep. I don't call myself a bad sleeper anymore.
What and yeah, it's huge I mean, it's one of the most important things you can do for recovery, as we've talked about like many times on
Yeah.
that.
And weight loss. Like if you're maybe not you're using grappling as your workout for a weight loss journey.
Yep.
I mean, get your sleep in check and you're gonna see tremendous
Well,
results.
you start optimizing your growth hormone secretion, right? Which is one of the biggest fat burning kind of hormones around, so to speak, using,
Mm.
it really
Now,
is.
we did have a question come in.
Yeah.
Actually, I just remembered, and I think I answered correctly. um, but taking in fats. So if we're going to be optimized,
Mhm.
not saying it's a silver bullet, not saying it's a you just killed yourself by doing this.
Mhm.
Take if you are trying to be maybe a little bit more strict and optimized on your nutritional intake.
Mhm.
They asked, when should I take my fats in nutritionally? So their avocado and stuff like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
I said not after your hard jiu-jitsu training. I
Yeah.
said if you're going to take your fats in, make it I'm not saying like a pre-workout, but earlier in the day before your training session, not right after. Um,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
no, maybe so.
Yeah. I think that's decent advice. I try to stay away from high fat loads during my glycogen refeeding. Because I'm trying to store stuff, and I
We want the muscle to eat up that carb that we just talked about 10 minutes
that's
ago
right.
that is just more nutrient dense for the muscle to get that
And
glycogen going
and
again, right?
protein to hit the anabolic switch, that type of thing.
Rather than so okay, we've gone over the protein and the carb, what that does when we're in that the glycogen depleted state.
Mhm.
If we took fat in instead, w- is it just not as, let's
Well,
say, to dumb it down, is it just not as good of a fuel?
no, it's not that. It's just that what are you trying to do with it? So, I've been on this kind of cyclic low carb thing, meaning that, most of the time I eat protein, fat, and some fiber in the way of fermented foods, maybe some fruit. But not a lot of sugary stuff, right? I try to keep
Mhm.
that low, but my post training session, that's when I hit my protein and starch. So fat in general is a preferred fuel to use more at low level activity and rest. That's the aerobic system. What we're trying to do with the carb is replete something that we've just lost. Now, if you if you're not working out to that intensity and you think you're repleting muscle glycogen, all you're doing is creating a big starch load, a sugar load that your body has to deal with and your liver has to deal with. Um,
Rather than the muscle.
that's rather than just having the muscle suck it right up in there. So we're having a very specific. I've gotten away from this whole macronutrient thing, like this is good, this is bad, because none of that's correct. I think we use these different things for different reasons, and the timing does have in my opinion, does have a impact. Um, you know, as long as you replete what you lost with the muscle glycogen, there's really no reason to kind of load yourself up. If you try to do that, where's that sugar going to go, right? Some of it will
Hmm.
be used during, we're not an all or nothing thing. We're never all glucose or all fat. But we do at low levels, our body does run much more efficiently using fats and then derived from fats, ketones too.
Mm.
Especially if someone likes the intermittent fast, right? They're gonna be converting a lot of those fats to ketones for the brain use. And then, but I've seen people get into this intermittent fasting thing, this low carb thing, and then crash and burn when they start jujitsu or any other glycogen depleting type of activity.
Because that refeed is not happening appropriately, right?
Correct. Correct.
Especially if they're, let's say, someone that's going down the road of maybe a more strict carnivore,
Mm,
is, but also with the jiu-jitsu training, um, you can, I think, because I've run into that where I started to become in tune with my body. If I didn't have like a full, at least after hard training, or if I did a two a day, a full cup of rice,
yep.
like, I mean, and that was even on like the low end, honestly. Like
Oh yeah.
if I had like a half a cup of rice, or I just had some, a bunch of protein, I felt satiated for sure. But the next morning, my muscles were actually sore. My energy levels were down compared to when I had, like, honestly, even if I just went to Burger King after a hard training sesh where
Yeah.
we sparred for an hour, we did 10 rounds, we did
Yeah.
situationals.
Yeah.
If I said, screw it, I'm going to Burger King after, and I had my large Pepsi and and my double Whopper and all that kind of stuff. The next morning, besides having a little bit of bubble guts, energy wise, I wasn't that bad.
That's
Like,
right.
I would say even better.
Yeah, for sure. And if you clean that up a little bit with the same macronutrients, but just better
Yes.
quality, of course, and that's going to be even better. But you're exactly right. And so that kind of falls into it. Because if we're not repleting that stuff, we're going to get a pretty big stress response. And you
Mm,
just mentioned something about before bed, because most of us do train in the evening. Many of us do. And that will help your sleep as well too. Because one of the worst things you can do is have a, big kind of cortisol response when you're trying to go to sleep. That
yeah.
there kept We have a natural cortisol increase in the early morning to actually wake us up. And when you see people that are like, I'm exhausted, but I just can't sleep, we call it tired but wired. It's usually due to kind of an improper cortisol type of, maybe the timing of even, and having that carb refeed after a hard training session will blunt that response.
Mm.
Yeah, super
What I
important.
like about this conversation is it's all lifestyle.
Yep.
Sure, there's some supplements that can help to optimize,
Yeah.
absolutely, and are a good best practice. But really, it's going to be lifestyle and dependent on your training frequency,
Mhm.
intensity, and adjusting and fine tuning from there. And I think also not being married in the beginning to any one thing. So try some things out. See how you like. I know, like Carrie, when I started, she was my general health doctor. Is that we're figuring out our lifestyle. How do I process foods compared to Olivia?
Right.
And we were doing glucose tests after every meal, like an hour or whatever the frequency was, and she could process things that I couldn't very well. I could process things that she couldn't very well, and so we start fine tuning over a 3 to 6 month period.
Yep.
When we start finding our groove, we understand what our body's going to do. If I have that peanut butter and jelly donut from Henry's, I understand that,
Yeah.
okay, I'm going to crash at 3 o'clock. So just know that, and it was pretty interesting, thinking that I read a certain diet plan or intermittent fasting, which is fantastic. I think I did really well with that, but Olivia doesn't do very well with that.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
we had to kind of fine tune that, because if she just would have saw me having a lot of weight loss success and all that kind of stuff and energy success, she could have been like, well, I'm going to intermittent fast, and then just get married to it and be like, man, I just feel bad for the last year.
Yeah, there still are some differences, especially with that, between male and females. I'm not saying that some females
Yes.
don't, but there are. Just from physiology is a little different as far as, because what you're doing is, the food restriction, the
Yeah, our
female.
hormones are just
Well, and
different. It's just
of course they are, because you have to potentially sustain a pregnancy,
yeah.
and you're you kind of built around that, so it's a little different. But you're exactly right, and that's why one of the first things I wrote in a kind of reversing diabetes 101 was figure out your glucose tolerance. And it had to do exactly what you just described, where we would say I described it very well in the, in the, I hate to even say the previous book that I wrote.
You wrote a book.
I know you don't, I know it's hard to believe, but you hit it perfectly. That's the first thing we do, because there are differences, and it depends on where you are in your journey, who you are. Like you said, you didn't have the tolerance for glucose that Olivia has. And so you can't do the same things she can do.
Mm-hmm.
Guess what?
Yeah.
Some people play for the NBA. Some people are like you and I. We can't have, there's some things that we can't control, right?
I watched Muggsy Bogues when I was in middle school.
Yeah, I
and
did
I was
too.
like, I have a chance. I got a chance.
Until you see the vertical leap on that guy. Yeah, so.
Yeah, or Spud Webb. And you're like,
yeah.
Oh, he's 5'8" and won a dunk contest. Like,
yeah.
We're not the same, I guess.
Right. And
that's a dunk on him.
And the same thing as our metabolic, that, what are we predisposed to? Are we predisposed to metabolic disease? Are we those people that can eat chocolate cakes and not gain anything and still maintain insulin sensitivity? It's like, it's not fair, but
yeah,
there you go.
Yeah, we don't all get the same deck of cards.
Nope.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that was a great combo. Do you have anything else on that?
No.
That you wanted to touch on?
No, just you figure out who you are and how to maintain, that your allostatic load such that you're not in a overtrained state all the time, like me. And I'm telling you this for someone that is apparently, and I am guilty of it constantly. And it's, it's like, I do my best, and I've had to miss training a couple times this last couple weeks, and it's killing me, because I hate missing training for a variety of reasons, but I've gotten myself into that situation. And so, I've become this, sickly 55-year-old in the winter, and I really need to get smarter about that. And we'll see if I do or not. I don't know that I will. I try.
Well, that's the thing. It's unique to you, and there's only one way around it, and that's like actual action. And sometimes that action is taking the foot off the throttle a little bit, and being strategic when you do go to class and you're like, okay, I'm not gonna roll, I'm just gonna help people and stuff like that, and you actually do it. And that's, I have to take that medicine too. I mean,
I know, dude. And that's
in my 40s, I notice, stuff catches up much faster.
Yeah, it does. But anyway, so if you guys have any questions about this, give us a drop a line.
grapplingwithpodcast@gmail.com. You guys can send anything into the email there. You can follow us on Instagram. You can DM us. We'll see that kind of stuff. Give us a like, subscribe on YouTube. We always enjoy it. Until next time, Chris.
Yes, sir. I've hit the outro music, and we're on our way out.
We'll see you later, buddy.
All right, man. Good job. Later.
Hey.